You've either got to be joking or completely out of your mind, old man. Young Lieutenant Jason Miller smirked as he looked at the expired military ID trembling in the hands of the gray-haired veteran standing at the main gate of Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Several other officers nearby immediately started laughing, and one of them even pulled out his phone to record the scene, mocking the old man in the worn U.S. Army jacket with faded Special Forces patches barely visible on the sleeves. The veteran looked like nothing more than an old, forgotten soldier from another era. Gray hair, heavy steps, old combat boots, and the exhausted eyes of someone who had seen far too much in life. But when Jason tossed the ID back into his hands and ordered security to escort him off the base, the old man didn't argue. He simply raised his eyes toward the American flag above the gate and quietly said, "I watched that flag rise over places where people no longer believed America still existed." The young officers exchanged amused looks and laughed even louder, convinced he was just another old veteran telling war stories. One soldier joked, "Next he's gonna tell us he personally won Vietnam." Another added, "The old guy probably just wants a free meal from the mess hall." But the old veteran remained completely calm. His name was William Harper, though the name meant nothing to the young soldiers standing there. None of them knew that back in the 1980s, enemies of the United States feared even hearing that name spoken in the Middle East, and that dozens of Pentagon operations had remained classified solely because of his involvement. Jason was already preparing to shut the gate in the veteran's face when suddenly a sharp emergency alarm echoed across the base, and one of the sergeants sprinted toward headquarters with a pale expression. Seconds later, the phone inside General Robert Hayes' office rang so loudly that every officer in the room froze. The general answered, but after hearing only a few words from the Pentagon, his face instantly changed. He slowly stood from his chair and asked only one question. "Are you telling me he's standing at the main gate right now?" A short reply came through the phone, and the general turned pale. "If William Harper is being treated without respect," the voice warned, "the responsibility will fall entirely on you." Within moments, General Hayes personally rushed out of headquarters with armed security behind him, while soldiers across the base watched in confusion as the command staff sprinted toward the gate because of some old veteran they had mocked only minutes earlier. By the time General Robert Hayes reached the main gate of Fort Bragg, the young officers had already straightened their uniforms, expecting a brutal lecture because of the emergency alarm. But what happened next was far worse than anything they imagined. The general didn't even look at them. He walked directly toward the old veteran and sharply saluted him as if he were greeting an active commander of the United States Army. Silence instantly fell over the checkpoint. Jason Miller slowly lowered his phone, and the soldiers nearby stopped smirking for the first time since the old man had arrived. William Harper calmly returned the salute, his tired eyes cold and unreadable, like a man who had spent most of his life staring death directly in the face. General Hayes spoke in a low, respectful voice. "Sir, the Pentagon has already been informed. We were ordered to escort you inside immediately." The young officers exchanged nervous looks, unable to understand why the entire base suddenly seemed terrified of one quiet old veteran. Finally, Jason gathered enough courage to ask, "Who exactly is he?" But the general slowly turned toward him with such a hard stare that Jason instantly regretted speaking. "You just tried to throw out the man responsible for bringing hundreds of American soldiers home alive," Hayes said coldly. A heavy silence filled the air. No one laughed anymore. The soldiers now noticed details they had ignored before. The faded scars covering Harper's hands, the old bullet wound near his neck, the way he walked like someone whose body had carried heavy combat gear through hell for decades. As the massive gates of the base slowly opened, General Hayes ordered everyone to step aside. But at that exact moment, one of the older sergeants froze as he stared at the worn insignia on Harper's sleeve. His face immediately went pale. "No way," he whispered under his breath. Jason looked confused until the sergeant spoke again in a shaky voice. "My father served in Kandahar. He told me stories about that symbol. He said the man wearing it once pulled an entire Marine unit out of an ambush after command had already declared them dead." William Harper said nothing. He simply walked forward through the gates while every soldier around him silently watched, as though a ghost from America's darkest wars had suddenly returned to life. As William Harper slowly walked deeper into Fort Bragg, an uneasy silence spread across the entire base. The same young officers who had mocked him at the gate only minutes earlier now stood frozen, avoiding eye contact, as if they suddenly realized they had made a terrible mistake. General Robert Hayes personally escorted the old veteran toward headquarters, and along the way, soldiers and officers instinctively saluted him, even though most of them still had no idea who he truly was. But the tension in the air kept growing stronger with every step. Once they entered the command building, a secure video connection from the Pentagon was already waiting on the main screen. A nervous intelligence analyst adjusted his glasses and immediately spoke in a serious tone. "No one in this room is authorized to record or repeat anything you are about to hear." The room instantly fell silent, enough to hear the faint hum of the computers. Jason Miller stood near the doorway, still trying to understand why an entire military base suddenly seemed afraid of one old man. Then the screen changed, revealing old black-and-white photographs from military operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and even classified missions in South America. In every single photo, there was one familiar face, a much younger William Harper. The soldiers inside the room exchanged shocked glances. Some of the images looked so heavily classified that even senior officers had clearly never seen them before. The Pentagon analyst continued speaking quietly. In 1987, the unit known as Ghost Reaper officially did not exist. Their missions were considered too dangerous and too sensitive for the U.S. government to acknowledge publicly. But it was Commander Harper who led the operation that rescued more than 40 American soldiers from captivity near Kandahar, after military command had already declared them dead. Complete silence filled the room. The young officers no longer saw Harper as some forgotten old veteran. They were now staring at a man whose name had survived for decades as a whispered legend among Special Operations Forces. But the analyst continued. 3 years later, Harper personally extracted a CIA team trapped near the Iraqi border after they were surrounded by over 200 enemy fighters. Out of 23 men, only one was lost. Jason suddenly felt his throat go dry. He remembered laughing at this man less than an hour earlier. Then another image appeared on the screen, a young Robert Hayes covered in blood and dirt, barely alive beside William Harper holding an assault rifle. The general slowly lowered his head. "I was supposed to die in Somalia in 1993, Hayes admitted quietly. "If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be standing here today." After those words, even the most arrogant officers in the room could no longer hide their shock. One captain finally asked in a nervous voice, "Why has nobody ever heard of him?" The Pentagon analyst remained silent for a moment before answering. Because half the operations he participated in officially never happened. Throughout the entire briefing, William Harper sat quietly in his chair, staring at the floor as though none of the stories mattered to him anymore. But then he slowly raised his head and calmly said, "I didn't come here because of the past." The room instantly froze again. General Hayes looked at him carefully and asked, "Then why did you come back, sir?" Without saying another word, Harper reached into his jacket and placed an old photograph of a young soldier onto the table. "Because my grandson serves on this base," he said quietly, "and yesterday he disappeared during a classified operation." The moment William Harper finished speaking, the entire command room fell into complete silence. General Robert Hayes slowly picked up the old photograph from the table and immediately recognized the young soldier in the picture. It was Sergeant Daniel Harper, a member of a classified reconnaissance team that had disappeared 2 days earlier during an operation near a restricted military facility in the Nevada mountains. Officially, the mission did not even exist yet in military records, and most soldiers on the base had no idea an entire unit had gone missing. Hayes let out a heavy breath and quietly admitted, "We already lost contact with them yesterday." But Harper interrupted him instantly. "No," the old veteran said in a calm voice. "You lost contact with them. I didn't." The words sent a chill through the room. Slowly, William Harper rose from his chair, and for the first time, the young officers no longer saw an old man standing before them. They saw the legendary commander they had heard about only moments earlier, the man whose missions had shaped some of America's darkest secret wars. General Hayes ordered everyone except senior command to leave the room, but before Jason Miller walked out, he suddenly stopped and looked back at Harper. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the arrogance he had shown at the gate. "Sir, I didn't know." Harper looked at the young lieutenant for several long seconds before answering calmly. "The problem isn't that you didn't know. The problem is that you stopped respecting the people who came before you." Jason lowered his eyes, unable to respond. An hour later, Fort Bragg had transformed into a full emergency deployment zone. Helicopters roared across the runway, while soldiers rushed equipment toward the hangars. Many of the younger troops watched in disbelief as William Harper personally geared up for the mission, checking weapons, maps, and radio frequencies with the calm precision of someone who had spent his entire life surviving impossible situations. Even at his age, there was something terrifyingly controlled about him, like the battlefield had never truly left his mind. Some soldiers whispered stories they had just heard from the Pentagon briefing, while others simply stared in silence, realizing they were standing near a living military legend. Before boarding the helicopter, General Hayes approached Harper one final time. "Sir, if anyone can bring them back alive, it's you." Harper gave only a small nod before stepping toward the aircraft. But just before the helicopter door closed, he turned toward Jason and the other young officers watching from the runway. "Remember this, Lieutenant," Harper said calmly over the sound of the spinning blades. "Heroes grow old, but they never disappear." Seconds later, the helicopter lifted into the dark night sky above Fort Bragg, while every soldier on the runway stood silently watching it vanish into the distance. And only then did the young officers fully understand that the man they had mocked at the gate was not just another forgotten veteran, but a ghost of America's hidden wars. A man whose name had been buried by the Pentagon for decades because some legends were simply too dangerous for the world to know.